13. 7000 BC Apparatus of capture. Proposition X. The state and its poles. Let us return to Dumézil's theses. 1. Political sovereignty has two poles. The fearsome magician emperor operating by capture, bonds, knots, and nets, and the jurist priest king proceeding by treaties, pacts, contracts. The couples Varuna Mitra, Odin Tyr, Wotan Tiwaz, Uranus Zeus, Romulus Numa. 2. The war function is exterior to political sovereignty and is equally distinct from both its poles, Indra or Thor or Tullus Hostilius. The state apparatus is thus animated by a curious rhythm, which is first of all a great mystery, that of the binder gods, or magic emperors, one-eyed men emitting from their single eye signs that capture, tie knots at a distance. The jurist kings, on the other hand, are one-armed men who raise their single arm as an element of right and technology, the law and the tool. In the succession of men of state, look always for the one-eyed and the one-armed. Horatius Cocles and Mucius Scaevola, de Gaulle and Pompidou. This is not to say that one has exclusive right to signs, the other to tools. The fearsome emperor is already the master of large-scale works. The wise king takes up and transforms the entire regime of signs. What it means is that the combination, signs, tools, constitutes the differential trait of political sovereignty, or of the complementarity of the state. Of course, the two men of state are always getting mixed up in affairs of war, but either the magic emperor sends to battle warriors who are not his own, whom he takes into his service by capture, or, more important, when he makes his appearance on the battlefield, he suspends the use of weapons. He throws his net over the warriors. His single eye throws them into petrified catatonia. He binds without combat. He incasts the war machine. This state capture is not to be confused with the captures of war, conquests, prisoners, spoils. As for the other pole, the jurist king is a great organizer of war, but he gives it laws, lays out a field for it, makes it principled, imposes a discipline upon it, subordinates it to political ends. He turns the war machine into a military institution. He appropriates the war machine for the state apparatus. We should not be too hasty in speaking of a softening, a humanization. On the contrary, this is perhaps when the war machine has only one remaining object, that of war itself. Violence is found everywhere, but under different regimes and economies. The violence of the magic emperor, his knot, his net, his way of making his moves once and for all. The violence of the jurist king, his way of beginning over again every move, always with attention to ends, alliances, and laws. All things considered, the violence of the war machine might appear softer and more supple than that of the state apparatus, because it does not yet have war as its object, because it eludes both poles of the state. That is why the man of war, in his exteriority, is always protesting the alliances and pacts of the jurist king, as well as severing the bonds of the magic emperor. He is equally an unbinder and a betrayer, twice the traitor. He has another economy, another cruelty, but also another justice, another pity. To the signs and tools of the state, the man of war opposes his weapons and jewelry. Once again, who could say which is better and which is worse? It is true that war kills and hideously mutilates, but it is especially true after the state has appropriated the war machine. Above all, the state apparatus makes the mutilation, and even death, come first. It needs them pre-accomplished, for people to be born that way, crippled and zombie-like. The myth of the zombie, of the living dead, is a work myth, and not a war myth. Mutilation is a consequence of war, but it is a necessary condition, a presupposition of the state apparatus and the organization of work, hence the native infirmity, not only of the worker, but also of the man of state himself, whether of the one-eyed or the one-armed type. The brutal exhibition of severed flesh shocked me. Wasn't it an integral part of technical perfection and the intoxication of it? Mankind has waged wars since the world began, but I can't remember one single example in the Iliad where the loss of an arm or a leg is reported. Mythology reserved mutilation for monsters, for human beasts of the race of Tantalus or Procrustes. It is an optical illusion to attribute these mutilations to accidents. Actually, accidents are the result of mutilations that took place long ago in the embryo of our world. And the increase in amputations is one of the symptoms bearing witness to the triumph of the morality of the scalpel. The loss occurred long before it was visibly taken into account. The state apparatus needs, at its summit as at its base, pre-disabled people, pre-existing amputees, the stillborn, the congenitally infirm, the one-eyed and the one-armed. Thus there is a tempting three-part hypothesis. The war machine is between the two poles of political sovereignty and assures the passage from one pole to the other. It is indeed in that order, 1, 2, 3, that things seem to present themselves in myth and history. Take two versions of the one-eyed and the one-armed gods analyzed by Dumézil. 1. The god Odin, who has a single eye, ties up the wolf of war and holds him in his magic bond. 2. But the wolf is wary and has at its disposal all its power of exteriority. 3. The god Tyr gives the wolf a legal security by leaving one of his hands in the wolf's mouth, so the wolf can bite it off if it does not succeed in extricating itself from the bond. 1. Horatius Cocles, the one-eyed, using only his face, his grimace and magic power, prevents the Etruscan commander from attacking Rome. 2. The war commander then decides to lay siege. 3. Mucius Scaevola takes a political tack, offering his hand as a security in order to persuade the warrior that it would be best to abandon the siege and conclude a pact. In an entirely different historical context, Marcel Detienne suggests an analogous schema in 3 moments for ancient Greece. 1. The magic sovereign, the master of truth, has at his disposal a war machine that doubtless does not originate with him, and which enjoys a relative autonomy within his empire. 2. This class of warriors has its own rules, defined by isonomy, an isotropic space, and a milieu. War spoils are in the middle, au milieu. He who speaks places himself in the middle of the assembly. This is another space. The rules are different from those of the sovereign, who captures and speaks from on high. 3. The hoplite reform, the groundwork for which was laid in the warrior class, spread throughout the social body, promoting the formation of an army of citizen soldiers. At the same time, the last vestiges of the imperial pole of sovereignty were replaced by the juridical pole of the city-state, with isonomy as its law and isotropy as its space. Thus, in every case, the war machine seems to intervene between the two poles of the state apparatus, assuring and necessitating the passage from one to the other. We cannot, however, assign this schema a causal meaning. The authors cited do not do so. In the first place, the war machine explains nothing, for it is either exterior to the state and directed against it, or else it already belongs to the state, incasted and appropriated, and presupposes it. If the war machine has a part in the evolution of the state, it is therefore necessarily in conjunction with other internal factors. And this is the second point. If there is an evolution of the state, the second pole, the evolved pole, must be in resonance with the first. It must continually recharge it in some way, and the state must have only one milieu of interiority. In other words, it must have a unity of composition, in spite of all the differences in organization and development among states. It is even necessary for each state to have both poles as the essential moments of its existence, even though the organization of the two varies. Third, if we call this interior essence or this unity of the state capture, we must say that the words magic capture describe the situation well, because it always appears as pre-accomplished and self-presupposing. But how is this capture to be explained then, if it leads back to no distinct assignable cause? This is why theses on the origin of the state are always tautological. At times, exogenous factors tied to war and the war machine are invoked. At times, endogenous factors thought to engender private property, money, etc., and at times specific factors thought to determine the formation of public functions. All three of these theses are found in Engels in relation to a conception of the diversity of the roads to domination. But they beg the question. War produces the state only if at least one of the two parts is a pre-existent state. And the organization of war is a state factor only if that organization is part of the state. Either the state has no war machine and has policemen and jailers before having soldiers, or else it has one, but in the form of a military institution or public function. Similarly, private property presupposes state-public property. It slips through its net, and money presupposes taxation. It is even more difficult to see how public functions could have existed before the state they imply. We are always brought back to the idea of a state that comes into the world fully formed and rises up in a single stroke, the unconditioned Urstaat.